think she might be the nicest person genuinely that I've ever met. But this place, and Pastor Windsor, so special to me is because of what she said. My parents, going through the most unimaginable tragedy. I mean, the stuff that I'm going to talk about, you see it on TV or on CSI or something, you don't know anyone this really happens to. And while they were suffering with their son in a coma and fighting for his life, they came here for support and for counsel. And you gave that to them, and Pastor Weems helped them, and so I am forever grateful to you. And I also know I was on your prayer list for many, many weeks, and obviously it worked because here I am. So I thank you for that as well. My story goes back to 2009. Thanksgiving in 2009, and it instantaneously became known as Thanksgiving Day Massacre. If you Google my name before this, you come up with a lawyer, or you come up with international speaker on leadership and business or something good. Now you Google my name, and it comes up with Thanksgiving Day Massacre victim, which I don't feel like a victim at all. But on that day, I was married to a young lady named Lisa, and we were going up to her parents, or not her parents, her cousin's house in Jupiter, Florida. 17 people, her extended family, we were all there. And we had just found out a little while earlier about she was about 2 or 3 months pregnant. And we were overjoyed it was going to be her first child. So we go up to Thanksgiving, and it was one of these Hallmark kind of Thanksgivings, like the one that they show you on commercials to get you in the holiday spirit. Like, you know, the turkey, and there's the red and yellow leaves everywhere, and laughing and joking and smiling, and just wonderful love in the room. They even had a little talent show where people would play piano and sing and tell jokes. And that's what this Thanksgiving was. But then, at some point, her estranged brother calls up and asks for directions. He's on his way. And his parents, I guess, had invited him there. And I'd only met the guy maybe 3 or 4 times, 5 times most in 4 years. He'd never been invited to anything. They kept their distance from him. So I was curious as to why he was coming, but he came. And he acted totally normal. You had no idea that he was about to do an unspeakable tragedy. Talked about football. He asked me about my legal cases, things like that. So at some point after this little talent show I was telling you about, people retired into the family room for coffee and cake, dessert, getting ready to leave. And he left the house for a brief moment. Nobody even noticed because there's 17 of us there. And as I'm getting ready to leave, because, you know, down here in South Florida, when you want to leave a big party, you got to give everyone a kiss on the cheek. So that can take 30, 40 minutes sometimes. So we were the first ones to get that process going. Lisa and I and our twin sister Carla said, hey, can we go? Let's just take off early and say goodbye to everybody. And early 10:30. And as we leave after our kisses, we get into the kitchen and there's the killer standing there by himself. And I said, hey, we're going to leave. And he says, why don't you stay a little while longer? And I said, no, we're tired. And I turned around to get the food for my sister-in-law, Carla. And I said, bang, bang, bang! Carla goes down on one knee, and I've been shot in the stomach. But if you've ever been around a gun, I didn't even grab my stomach. I grabbed my ears, because the ringing, it sounded like 1,000 old-style telephones at once. And I see him point the gun right at my head. And I could see the smoke still coming out of the gun from his first couple shots. And I threw the food up in the air, and when he shot, he missed, and I grabbed Carla and we dove in the other room. And then I said, it's got a gun, call 911. And he comes over and he stands right over me. And he points the gun at my head, and thank goodness that through divine intervention, and because he was a bad aim, he missed me to the left, put a bullet hole in my collar. Then he missed me to the right, and put a hole in the floor. And then he turned his attention back, shooting people in the kitchen. And I started crawling away from him, and I left a trail of blood from my stomach across the floor. And I hear the shooting and the screaming and the wailing. It was awful. But then as I sat there on the floor, I see him run out of the kitchen toward the front door after having shot 2 sisters, his 89-year-old aunt. I see him run into the room of a 6-year-old little girl who was sleeping. And I heard him shoot her. And then he left. And wow, all of that was awful, the screaming, the shooting. But this is the sound I heard after all that ended. Eerie silence. And I sat there, and there was nobody there. I'm looking, I saw Carla take her last breath a few feet away from me. I knew the little girl was probably dead. I didn't know who else was dead. But I was like, I'm in a tomb. It's me and a bunch of dead people. And I went down and I could now see the blood coming out of my stomach, and it was getting bigger, and my shirt turned into like a sieve, and it was pouring out. And I just looked and I said, you know, I'm going to die. There's nobody here to help me. I couldn't even speak. And I prayed, not to survive, but I just prayed to go to heaven. I said, you know, I want to be very clear. I got very pragmatic right then. I said, okay, God, this is what I believe. I believe that you are the one true God. I believe that Jesus died for my sins. And I fully expect to be with you in heaven because I'm pretty sure I'm dying right now. And I just kept saying that prayer over and over again because I wanted to make sure it was clear what I believed. But lo and behold, the police come and the fire rescue come and they see fatal all over the house. And they say, we got one that's alive. They come rushing over and take me by the air helicopter to the ER, and then they put me in a coma. And that's where I stayed for 3 months. I stayed in this coma. I had infections all over. They opened me up like 3 times. I had pneumonia. My heart was out of rhythm. I lost one kidney, but we went through it. The other kidney stopped working for a month. It's on dialysis. My white blood cell count was 3 times the normal limit, and the doctors told my parents, he's got less than 1 chance of surviving. Less than 1% chance of surviving. And if he does survive, he's likely to be brain dead or severely mentally having difficulties. Imagine that. It got so bad that a few weeks before I actually woke up in February, about 2.5 months into this, the doctors or nurses told my parents, you should start making funeral arrangements. He's got an infection. We can't figure out where it is. We got the other ones. He's not going to make it till Saturday. Imagine that. This is what my parents were coming, worshiping with you. They're being told, I'm not going to make it till Saturday. So, they come in a couple days later, and nurse priest come all cheering. And they said, what's going on? He said, well, you're not going to believe this. Patrick found the infection in his body on his own, killed it. His kidney decided to start working all of a sudden, and we think we're going to wake him up in about a day or 2. So they were overjoyed, and prayers of joy, I'm sure, over everything. And I did wake up. February 24th, 2010, I wake up, I opened my eyes, and wow, can you imagine? First thing I felt was, wow, these doctors are amazing, because I was in shock last night, and I don't even feel the pain anymore. And then, of course, they tell me it's been 3 months, and I'm processing this, and I couldn't move. Because they say that when you put athletes, real athletes, in a full bed rest for just 2 weeks, they lose 50% of their muscle mass. I was in a coma for 3 months. I couldn't move. Couldn't move muscles. Couldn't lift up my arms. Couldn't lift up my neck. I had a tracheotomy, tube in my throat. I couldn't talk. So here I am trying to deal with all of this stuff. I thought, wow, this is unbelievable. I can't move. I've been shot. You know, all these other things. And I didn't know who else had been shot. I had no idea about Lisa. So, my parents talked to a priest, because it was a Catholic hospital, and they asked him to break the news to me. So you imagine this first week I was dealing with my own stuff. I can't move, all these other problems, and this priest comes in and he says, hey, I pray for you. And you know, I'm not going anywhere, so of course I nod my head. And I couldn't speak. And he prays for me, and after a long, beautiful prayer at the end, he said, dear God, please let her be his guardian angel. Let her watch over him. My eyes popped open and I looked up at my mom and I'm out. Cool. And I could see when her eyes filled up with just tears. And it hit me deep in my stomach. I mean, you know, they talk in the Bible about the wailing and all of that. You know, people doing tearing their clothes and just come. I couldn't move voluntarily, my muscles. I couldn't speak. And yet deep within my stomach, I could feel it coming out, and I opened my mouth to the wail and nothing came out because I couldn't speak. And it was the most horrendous thing ever that here I am now breathing and dealing with my situation all at the same time. And let me tell you, it was so awful. And I would ask why questions. You know, I'm sitting there. Why, God, would you let this happen? You could have stopped this. You're all powerful. Why would you let this happen? Why those 4 people? Why did I get pregnant and then do this? Why would you do this to me? Why would you do this to her? How would a 6-year-old little girl? Why? And to make matters worse, when I wasn't questioning that, I had post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't know if you know how that works. Soldiers get this a lot. It was awful. The incident plays in my head on a loop. I'd see the killer in the kitchen. I would talk to him. Then bang, bang, bang. My body felt like I was getting shot again. I would retch and move. my ears would be ringing even though nothing was happening in my hospital room. And then I would hear the eerie silence after he ran out. And as soon as he finally ran out, I'd feel like I could get a reprieve. On a loop, there he is in the kitchen again. And it goes over and over all night long. So I got pretty good at having pity parties for myself. I got to tell you, I'm now an expert at it. I could take any thought and just say, you know, I'm in the worst situation in this hospital. I dare anybody else in this hospital to tell me their situation is worse than mine. I mean, I lost a loved one, and I'm sitting here injured, I can't move. Their stories aren't real, my stories are tragedy. I dare anybody to do that. This is not fair. Why did this happen to me? But every night I would still pray for strength. And you know, the interesting thing about that is, as I just told you, I'm questioning why? Why? At the same time saying, oh, and by the way, can you give me strength and help me? It's interesting. It's kind of like when you're in an airport, right, and your flight gets bumped, and you go to talk to the person behind the counter to get them a new flight, and you're mad, you're frustrated with them and their airline, that person, but she's the only person that can help you get on that next flight. So what do? Are you frustrated, or are you nice, and do you ask for help? It's kind of like that. And yeah, I struggled for a little bit. But then, one day, after all the family parties, young man, patient guy, comes rolling into my room. His name is, I knew he was a blessing. I knew he was a blessing from God. You know what his name was? Alfredo Blvd. How about that? Just in case God wanted to make sure that I knew who he was and where he was coming from. Rolls in my room and starts talking to me about being shot. Talks to me about my tubes. I have like 15 tubes in me. I have machines all around me. He's talking to me so point on, spot on. I knew this guy had been shot. And he knew what I was going through. And he had my attention. I listened to him more than anybody else. And finally he looks down at my legs. They were about the size of my arms at that point. And he says, hey, don't worry about your legs, bro. You'll get used to being paralyzed. Don't worry, man. I did. You'll get used to it. And my mom said, oh, he's not paralyzed. He's just atrophied right now. He's probably going to walk again someday. And Alfredo says, what? You're going to walk again? That's great! You see, bro, because my legs are on strike. But you're going to walk. And he was so happy. I'm like, I can't believe this gentleman is so happy. He says, praise God. God is great. You're going to walk again. And I'm like, here's a guy. This guy can be happy and overjoyed and just believe that God is so great with his condition. What am I doing? And then little by little, I learned about other people in the ICU. Granted, I couldn't talk for 4 weeks. But my parents would tell me things. Woman comes in, fell off the horse, kind of like Christopher Reeve, hit her head, and she's a vegetable. She's in the room next to me. Then a guy comes in, we assume he was a gang member because there was about 10 other guys with the same color bandana in the room with them, and he had been shot 15 times or something ridiculous like that. And then the Haiti earthquake happens, and all these victims get moved into the hospital, in the ICU with me, with the most horrendous stories of losing their whole family, and maybe losing a foot, and I mean, just crazy stuff. And all of a sudden, after hearing Alfredo and hearing his stories, he said, my story is the best one in ICU. And I started to stop having these pity parties, and I focused on celebrating small victories. The first time I touched my face, when I finally raised my hands up, the first time I lift my feet off the bed, when they took machines out, the first time they took the tube out and I could try to make some sounds, because I had to learn how to talk again. The first time I walked, when I went to rehab, all of these things, I started celebrating every small victory and saying, I no longer love pity parties. I no longer will go down depression and despair. Wow, I won't do that. As Alfredo said, I will walk again. I had trust in God. I prayed for strength. I said, get me through one more night. God, just let me take one more step. Now let me just finally touch my face. And I kept praying for strength and praying for strength, and it worked. And I truly believe that is why I was able to come out. So, of course, it wasn't all fun and games, you know. When I get home, even though I was positive as much as I could be, I still cried. I was grieving. But when I got home, you know, you wake up, and I wake up and I'm alone. That was bad. My wrists still didn't work. They were flopping around because I had wrist drop for about a year. I was sore. I would sit up and get dizzy and have to lay down. It would be a half-hour process just to get out of bed. I had to push myself off the bed and stabilize myself, and then try to walk like this to the bathroom. Then I had to take off my bandages and scarves. And by the time all that was done, half an hour later, I would go eat my bowl of cereal and I would just sit there and cry. And a tear would just roll off my nose and drip in my nose. walking. I'd been booked to speak in Japan right before the incident, 1 year later. It was November of 2010. I was booked. Then the incident happens, and when I finally could talk, I called up the guy at the organization that invited me, and I said, hey, I still can't walk yet or move, but if you haven't given away my keynote spot, I still plan on coming there in November. I woke up in February, so every day I'm like, you gotta learn how to walk. You gotta learn how to speak better. You gotta get your gestures and your passion back if you want to give this keynote. And I did. And as I started to do this, I spoke there in November. In October, I spoke in Detroit at the church. And then I started speaking in Chicago at the church and sharing my message and writing down my thoughts as they were real. Because I wanted to help people. And I kind of came up with these two things that I want to leave you. First, no matter what you're going through, whether it's divorce, you lost your job, it doesn't have to be such a horrendous tragedy like mine. Whatever you're going through is big to you. And you've got to carry this with you for the rest of your life. People say to me, well, how do you get past this? How did you get over it, Patrick? You don't get over it. You don't get past it. But the good thing is, even though I have to carry this burden with me for the rest of my life, the free will God has given us allows me to choose how to carry it. Some people carry it like a boulder and it weighs them down into depression and they never recover. Some people, they have this anger that holds them back and they just walk and do all the motions of life, but they can't move forward and they look normal, but they're not. But I'm not doing those two things. What do we give the military when they go through something and survive? We give them medals, stripes. So since I have to carry it, say, God, I want a medal. I would like to have a medal, and this is how I'm going to carry it. And I'm going to show people my medal. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to share your message of strength. And so that's how I carry it. You don't get past it. You can't pretend it never happened. You can carry it like a champion. And then I thought, well, how do I explain to people this battle I had every day with the bed and getting out of bed? That was just tough. And I came up with this boxing ring analogy, and I said, sometimes you box. I like these serious boxing matches. And sometimes you're in there and you're just hitting them away. You can't get hit. You're just floating like a butterfly, stinging like a bee, right? And you got it. And there's other times like racking elbow and your head just getting bashed in and you're getting knocked down. You get up and you're bleeding and bruised. And what happens in every one of these fights, no matter where you are in your life, the bell rings from time to time. You go back to your corner and you sit on the stool. 2 minutes later, the bell's going to ring and you have a choice to make. Do you get up off that stool and get back in the fight? Or do you stay on the stool? Now yes, you have people in your corner, your pastor, your therapist, your friends. It's like your corner man, your water boy. They're tending to your wounds or giving you advice. But they can't get you off that stool and get back in the fight. They won't. They can't. And God is not going to send little angels down to lift you up out of bed and work you like a marionette. That's not how it works. But God is there. He's your strength coach, I think. He's in your corner, your strength coach. He is training you, and he's your divine strength coach. But because he's your strength coach, he knows how much strength you have. He expects you to get back in the fight. So in boxing, when you've had enough, your strength coach throws in the white towel for you. And God will do that if he thinks you've had enough. He did it for me. But if he thinks you've got the strength to get back in that fight, your divine strength coach demands that you get back in there and try to make something happen. And that got me out of bed every day, realizing that. So, if you look in Isaiah 40:31, he says, those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. And if you want to know how to throw the towel, go to 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation is overtaking you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will provide a way out so you can endure it. So you got to realize, courage is not always going to be a roar like when you come out. Sometimes courage is that quiet voice in the middle of the night that you say to yourself, I'm going to get up tomorrow. I'm going to get out of bed. I'm going to try again. And I'm going to trust that God's going to give me the strength that I ask him. Trust in my divine strength coach. I believe he blessed me tenfold. And you're seeing that they're here today. My wife Jennifer. In 2011, I'm from Chicago, I'm a Midwest boy. He sends me a girl from Indiana, here in South Florida. Beautiful and supportive, caring, smart, and she's here. And then this year, blessed us with the birth of a son, Lucas, who's also here. And my job, a law firm, held my job 2 months after that, I tried my first case again, and I won. How crazy is that? And all the speaking I was doing around the world, you don't think God was preparing me for something bigger doing this? So He was blessed me tenfold, and it's because I trusted Him. So whatever you're going through, how big or small, I just ask, wear your challenge or your burden, wear it with a medal. Fight through it every day. Trust your divine strength coach. Because if you do, you will be able to get through anything. And I really do hope that today you can see the medal I'm wearing that God's given me to wear every day. Thank you so much.
Powerful message. Powerful message. Thank you so much. It will be hard for us to show our thanks. If it is sufficient for you, I think that our thanks will come in ways that we will not only take in and use your words of hope for us today, but share this with others through either your book or through our own testimony in similar ways to your story that you shared today. So thank you. But as a very, very small token for your family. When children are baptized in this church like today, we offer each child kind of a baby Bible as a first way of getting to know who the Lord is. And of course, baptism is a sign of new life. And we not only celebrate that with the child, but with all of us that come to experience new life in the Lord throughout our lives. And certainly in the tough seasons of our lives. So we'd like to present your little son with one of our Bibles, that he too, through your new life that you've shared with us today, he too might come to know that wonderful good news that comes with knowing the Lord. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to share in our closing hymn in just a moment, and after the service, Patrick will leave with me, but we're going to greet you closer to the fellowship hall so that he can go on in and receive your questions. He's happy to, or your sharing with him, as well as he'll have his books there. We have, of course, snacks at our fellowship time, so please greet him and thank him for coming today, and we'll meet you out in the courtyard.